Hello, and welcome to an introduction to human trafficking for community members. This video was created by the Human Trafficking Initiatives of Metropolitan Family Services. The Human Trafficking Initiative is a project of Legal Aid Society of Metropolitan Family Services. MFS has been providing free legal services in the Chicago area since 1886. The project has been at the forefront of the fight against human trafficking in the Chicago area since 2012. The project provides free, confidential, and holistic legal representation to survivors of human trafficking across the state of Illinois. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email us at trafficking@metrofamily.org, or you can give us a call at 312-986-4105. In this video, we will be discussing the following: what is human trafficking, indicators of human trafficking, remedies for survivors, and how the community can help in the fight against human trafficking. First and foremost, what is human trafficking? Human trafficking is the exploitation of a person for the purpose of compelled labor or a commercial sex act through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Here we can see multiple examples of how force, fraud, and coercion can be used in trafficking. First, we have force. This is the use of actual physical force or restraint that a trafficker may use. Linguistic, social, or physical isolation as well. They may use physical assault or battery against the victim, and even go so far as sexual assault. Fraud pertains to lies or misrepresentations to trick or defraud the victim. This can be through promises of marriage or of love and support, promises of certain working conditions, or the pay and benefits associated with that work. It could also be through debt bondage or confiscation of identification documents. Lastly, we have coercion, and these are threats of harm or threats to abuse the legal process. We see this in threats of deportation or threats of physical or violent harm to the victims themselves and possibly their coworkers, family, or friends. This could also be through threats of arrest or threats to report the victim to authorities. This as well could be through confiscation of identification or other important personal documents. Now let's talk a little bit about labor trafficking. Labor trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person through the use of force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjecting that person to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. In this image, we can see employees at a restaurant. It is clear that the employees are tired and seemingly overworked. We see a person who looks like the manager hitting an employee. At the end of the night, the manager pays the employees very little, and they return to the horrible conditions that the manager, or the trafficker, has them living in. Now let's discuss sex trafficking. A sex act becomes a commercial sex act when anything of value is exchanged for the act. The thing exchanged does not have to be money. It can be the promise to do or not to do something. It can be in exchange for a favor or in exchange of goods or services. It also does not need to come into the hands of the victim. For example, a case that happened in the United States involved parents who offered their car salesman to have sex with their 14-year-old daughter instead of paying the car installment payments. The sex act became a commercial sex act when the car installment payments were used and exchanged for the sex that a third person, namely the child's parents, benefited from. It's important to note that when the victim of sex trafficking is a minor under the age of 18, he or she does not need to show force, fraud, or coercion. Thus, even if a child agrees to engage in sex acts and a third person benefits from the act, the child is still considered a victim. Moreover, the definition of sex trafficking of minors includes any kind of pornography involving minors as well. Again, under trafficking laws, anyone under 18 cannot agree to sex acts of child pornography. Thus, in the previous case, even if the daughter had agreed to have sex with the car salesman, she would still be considered a victim because it happened when she was under 18 years of age. Another example is U.S. versus Lewis. and the trafficking of all the girls in that case followed the same pattern. Defendant Shelby Lewis would approach with a desire to induce prostitution. He would approach girls who were young, uneducated, and socioeconomically marginalized. Some of these girls were homeless or runaways. The defendant invited each victim to live with him and have sex with him, and also instructed them how to work as prostitutes. And as they were all under 18, they were all considered to be trafficking victims. Both federal and Illinois laws provide safe harbor for anyone under the age of 18 who is providing commercial sex acts. Now, what does this mean? This means that they will not be charged or arrested with solicitation or prostitution, and that they are able to be considered a trafficking survivor and referred to appropriate services. So, who can be a victim? Anyone. Victims can be U.S. citizens, men or women, adults or children, strangers, friends, and family members. The traffickers may or may not be members of the same ethnic origin or nationality as their victims, and again, they can all come from various socioeconomic backgrounds. Now, it is important to note that there is a difference between human smuggling and human trafficking. Human smuggling is considered a crime against the state and involves movement, namely the transportation of foreign citizens into the United States with the deliberate evasion of U.S. immigration laws. Trafficking, however, is considered a crime against persons, not the state, as defined under U.S. and Illinois laws. It also involves exploitation. This may happen to both citizens and non-citizens and does not require movement. Many victims were and are born and raised in Illinois and trafficked in Illinois as well. Smuggling, however, can evolve to trafficking. The fact of being smuggled is used by traffickers against victims to keep them in their trafficking situation, but smuggling does not negate their status as trafficking victims, nor the ability to seek legal or immigration relief to escape the trafficking situation. In another case that occurred in 2005, involved the initial smuggling of workers from Peru. Once they arrived in the United States, instead of letting the workers go, the smugglers forced the workers to stay in their homes and to work for them. They were supposed to work until they supposedly paid off the smuggling debt that they owed to the smugglers, who are now considered traffickers. The debts ranged from $6,000 to $13,000. The traffickers confiscated the victims' passports, all of the workers' pay, and threatened them with reporting to authorities in case they tried to escape. During the raid of 3 houses, which the traffickers owned, the authorities found 69 Peruvians living in squalid conditions. 13 of them were minors. With that said, trafficking victims who are foreign nationals are not always undocumented, or do not always come into the United States using false documents. Many enter the United States with valid visas and end up in situations of abuse. There have been trafficking victims who have come to the U.S. on a K-1 or a fiancé visa, or on the temporary worker visas, such as the H-1B or the H-2B, as well as on student exchange program visas, such as the J-1 or the F-1, and others as well, like the religious worker visas or international organization worker staff visas. In the case of David versus Signal, international workers from India were recruited under the H-2B working visa process to work at Signal shipyards in Mississippi and Texas. The workers each paid the labor recruiters and a lawyer between $10,000 and $20,000, some paying even more in recruitment fees and other costs after recruiters promised good jobs, green cards, and permanent U.S. residency for them and their families. Most sold property or plunged their families deeply into debt to pay the fees. Once they arrived, they were abused, mistreated, and they were made to sleep in cramped, heavily guarded quarters and were not allowed to leave. They faced disparagement because of their nationality. Those who tried to complain were threatened with deportation. This is just one of the many examples of how foreign nationals often do enter with valid visas, and it ends up turning into a situation of trafficking. This map shows the various industries where trafficking has been found. It is not representative of the actual geographic location where the trafficking has occurred. The multitude of industries where trafficking has occurred can exist anywhere in the United States, for instance, in Illinois. Sex trafficking has been found in hotels, residential brothels, escort services, and throughout the internet. Labor trafficking has occurred in domestic work, factories, massage parlors, agriculture, landscaping, and others. The list of industries is not exhaustive by any means. It grows longer as more trafficking indecencies are uncovered in other industries, such as door to door sales crew and even healthcare. Now let's move on to human trafficking indicators. Trafficking is considered a hidden crime because it happens in both legitimate and illegitimate industries. Victims often do not self identify as victims. The trafficker's power and control is not always easy to discover, but the methods of power and control can manifest on a victim in various ways, and the community can help detect it by looking closer. The indicators of trafficking can be grouped into three general categories: physical indicators, emotional indicators, and the surrounding circumstances. Let's start with the physical indicators. A trafficking victim may present as malnourished, could have serious dental issues because they may not have seen a dentist in years, may have bruises, scars, or signs of physical abuse or torture. They may have a workplace injury, potentially that has gone untreated from weeks, months, to years. It possibly could have chronic pain as well. This shows that a primary objective of a trafficker is economic gain. The victims are tools to make money and should keep working to make that money until they cannot, due to disability or physical ailment that impedes the work. For instance, a nationwide trend is that gangs are changing their notices from drug trafficking to sex trafficking. It appears more lucrative because one victim can generate money every day, as opposed to a one-time source of revenue like drugs. Another physical indicator may be branding tattoos that show the name or symbol of their controller or trafficker. Besides names or symbols, the trafficker may have forced certain words associated with their power and control, such as loyalty or family, on their victims. Now let's look at emotional or mental indicators of trafficking victims. A victim may be experiencing anxiety, helplessness, exhaustion, depression, or the intense fear of being alone. These indicators may show that a victim does not have sufficient rest days or that they're working very long hours. These may also reflect their constant fear due to threats of the trafficker, that the victim will be deported or will be reported to authorities. Hence, they may also have a significant fear of authorities. They may avoid eye contact when an individual or image, an authority, is speaking to them. They may be disoriented. They may not know where they are. They may not know the time of day or even what day it is. Some trafficking victims are moved around from state to state. Not staying in one place helps erase the trafficker's tracks, so victims often do not know where they are. Their stories may change, and victims may be made to memorize a story and sometimes to change their name, just to conceal the trafficking. Now let's check the surrounding circumstances. Is there limited freedom or indications of limited freedom? Are there high security measures in the workplace or the living location? Is the individual not free to come and go as they please? Is there a lack of control? Victims may have few or no personal possessions. They may not have any control over their money, their records, or even their bank accounts. They may owe a very large debt and are continuously unable to pay it off. They may not be in control of their own identification documents or even know where they are. They may be unable to speak for themselves, having someone else always speaking on their behalf. This could be because the trafficker would state that the victim may be too young to express themselves adequately. Work conditions. Are there individuals providing commercial sex acts under 18? Are they in the commercial sex industry? Do they have a pimp or manager if they are? Are they working excessively long hours, unusual hours, or not allowed breaks even to use the restroom? Perhaps they were recruited via false promises regarding the nature and conditions of the work they are performing. And lastly, maybe they're unpaid, paid very little, or paid only through tips. Here's another example, a case from some years ago that happened at the New York State Fair. Some workers from Mexico were brought on H-2B visas. Those are temporary worker visas to help sell some food at the fair. They worked 16 to 18-hour days for 2 weeks, and on the 12th day, they worked for 24 hours. They were promised $10 an hour, but paid only when they begged for food from other people. They were made to share beds infested with bedbugs, and the workers eventually got super sick, but were still forced to work and serve the food. The employer allowed one worker to go to the healthcare center, only after the bites were all over their hands and their feet, rendering him incapable to do the work. Eventually, the workers were connected to a labor nonprofit group who helped report a case of stolen wages to the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division. The Department of Labor found that because of all of the surrounding circumstances, it was not just a wage issue, but actually trafficking. Remedies. One remedy may be to vacate or expunge criminal records of prostitution and other crimes forced to commit during their trafficking. Prostitution convictions are eligible at any time after an entry of a verdict or a finding of guilty. That means either immediately at the entry of a verdict, or it could be years later, as long as there's due diligence. Again, there is a reminder that minors should not be charged or prosecuted for prostitution. Criminal records may be eligible for immediate sealing upon completion of his or her sentence if the underlying offense was a direct result of trafficking. Another remedy available would be restitution or payment for harm caused from the trafficking. The restitution could be for back pay or proper wages. It could be payment for medical, legal, or psychological harm caused by the trafficking, and the restitution could also be for other damages. For example, some traffickers take out loans in the name of the victim, so that restitution would help pay back those loans as well as provide them some support afterwards. Restitution for victims can come through criminal cases in federal or state court, through civil cases as well, so through the court system, through labor agencies or commissions. They may also be eligible for crime victim compensation as well. Furthermore, there is immigration relief possibly available to survivors of human trafficking. For example, there may be a T visa eligibility for a survivor. A T visa is strictly for survivors of human trafficking. A U visa, which is for immigrant victims of crime, may also be available to a victim. Trafficking may be one of those crimes, or they could be a victim of one of these following crimes: sexual assault, domestic violence, kidnapping, fraud and foreign labor contracting, and others. A multitude of different crimes that an individual may qualify for falls under the U visa. Lastly, an individual may be eligible for immigration relief under VAWA, or the Violence Against Women Act. There may be additional case management services available to those survivors as well. Case management services will help an individual connect to counseling. If that is deemed necessary, they can also help with applications for benefits, housing, and other public benefits depending on what the client is in need of, in order to restore their lives as well. The Human Trafficking Hotline relies greatly on concerned citizens. The number one source of tips were community members, or as some call it, Good Samaritans. The second source of tips are the trafficking victims themselves. Other sources include family members, victims of other crimes, and nonprofit staff. The hotline is a great resource because of its accessibility 24/7, the ability to provide free linguistic services, and it is confidential. That concludes this video. If you have any questions, comments, or need technical assistance, please feel free to reach out to us at trafficking@metrofamily.org or at our intake line, 312-986-4105. Thank you.